This is The Edge of Innovation, Hacking the Future of Business. I'm your host, Paul Parisi.
And I'm Jacob Young.
On The Edge of Innovation, we talk about the intersection between technology and business, what's going on in technology, and what's possible for business. Well, today I'd like to welcome Paul Rush from Substantial. Okay, so you were at this and you closed down after a few years. What was next?
It was the immediate transition to Substantial, which is my current company.
Okay.
So I'd had a bunch of people who really loved working together. Turns out when you gather a bunch of people with a strong common interest, our case was music and electronic music in particular, we all were very happy working with each other. We were all very unhappy not making money. And so I turned to everyone and said, hey, how do you guys feel about doing consulting for a little bit and actually making some money? And everybody was like, that sounds fantastic. And the funny thing is that there was a sort of change in the momentum, or like the headwind, that was, I think, really important. And there's another thing that I consider a big lesson, which is about momentum in business. The feeling at the digital music retail company was of pushing a boulder uphill. Mm-hmm. And it was so hard, and it got harder further it went up, and we were tired. And we started this little consulting business, and it was like letting the boulder go and following it downhill. Within a couple of weeks, we had office space, clients, employees, and we're in the black. And when you get something that just clicks, you get a product that clicks, you follow. And I feel like that's not something that I know how to do reliably, but I know that when you push too hard in the wrong direction, there's a sign there. And there are moments when you'll just get something that kind of works and feels good. It's worth paying attention to those signals.
Well, let me ask you a question. You were all together. Why were you elected to say, hey, let's think about doing a consulting gig? Well, I mean, why did you fill that vacuum? Or was there a vacuum? Or was there other people who said, hey, let's go do this, and you said, no, I want to go this direction, and people followed you? Or because right there, that is a demonstration of entrepreneurial insight, where you're saying, let's do this.
You know, I think this goes to some other things we were talking about earlier. I don't understand how to identify these attributes and if they're learned or granted your personality. I was the one who started the previous company, and so I was in that position, in the leadership position, and it just occurred to me as the right thing to do, and so I made it happen. And it was as simple as that. I don't think anyone else was even suggesting other ideas of what we could do next. I think probably everybody else assumed that they'd just go get a job. And I'm mystified by this too. I mean, what makes a person do that? Just have this idea that they can carve their own path, they can go their own way at any moment. But that's who I am, and that's who I know a lot of entrepreneurs to be.
Well, yeah, I guess I agree with you wholeheartedly, but was there anybody else who was saying, hey, we should do something? Or was it pretty much, so for me, that was probably very obvious to you that was a potential next step.
Yeah. Like
blatantly obvious. But I'll bet for the majority of the people that went with you, it wasn't obvious. And when you mentioned it, it's like, hey, that's a cool idea. And it's like, duh. When you're an entrepreneur, one seems to be so close to the ideas that it's like, well, this is obvious. Of course you'd do that. And I'm wondering how you have some ability to look back on it. What can you offer for insight? Did that happen? Not even thought of? Or, just what happened? A little bit deeper there. Like each other, let's go do something together? Or was it?
Yeah, well, I think I realized that I had something valuable, which is a group of talented engineers and people that liked each other. And, this sort of ethos around the VC world where VCs will generally look to who the leadership and who the team is, sometimes above and beyond what the product or concept is,
right,
was something that just felt sort of natural to me, that, hey, we had something valuable here, which is a collected group of people who are good. What can we do with this? We could have gone and started a product, but it didn't seem practical given that we had negative money. And I had, known that there were people who were hiring for this kind of work, and it was a high demand. So it was a sort of just natural answer of the question of what comes next. But I think it is interesting that not everybody asks that question to themselves. What can I do with what I have? How do I take what I have into the world in a way that is novel or non-traditional, right, I guess?
So do you think, as we sort of talk about entrepreneurship and innovation here, see, for you, that's not a scary discussion to have, to say, well, hey, let's do this. Whereas some people may not even perceive it, let alone have the wherewithal to survive the scariness of it. They may be terrified of saying, I'm going to go start a business, or let's do consulting, and they just have no. Now, me and you would come out and say, I have no idea how to do that, but well, we'll figure it out. Some people are wired. Maybe the majority of people is, I have no idea how to do that. I'm going to run away.
Right. Yeah, I have thought about the sort of archetypes of people that make up the entrepreneurship community, and I think there are different ones. I think you and I might be more similar. I do know that there's people who work in the sort of corporate world for 15, 20 years even, and then decide one day that they want to do this. Although I think that's probably a lower percentage. I really think that if it's not something that was sort of given at birth, then I think the alternative is that someone turned you onto the idea in a strong way that you could do your own thing. That's the reason why I want to teach entrepreneurship and why I care. I mean, I think it's a very positive force for the world. So at the source, it's that. But I don't think most people even know that it's a possibility. And I can't identify when, but I know I was exposed to this idea by different people. I mean, my father probably was one. He wasn't an entrepreneur, but he was independent. Knowing that you can go out there and do your own thing is the seed. And when that grows with some amount of confidence or desire to try, I think those two things are super important. I think it's a shame that we don't teach people more that this is a thing that's possible.
So you were at Substantial, you founded Substantial, and now you're I guess back at Substantial. What happened in between there?
Well, the first couple of years of the company were fast growth. We hit the 2008 slowdown. That was a really, really rough year. We survived it, and then we started growing again, and we were doubling year over year for quite a while. And then I think it was incredible because we never really intended to have a consulting company. It was an accidental start, as a lot of companies can be accidental successes. And then suddenly I wound up with 85 employees and a company that was doing very well and people were very excited to work at, and we were just sort of following our noses. The problem with that is that following your nose only gets you so far. And people run into this at different points, I think, when they're starting businesses, but you do run into a wall of a lack of experience, the sort of intuition that you have about where to go next, or the luck, whatever you want to call it. Sort of runs out. I got frustrated after a year or two of sort of stagnant situation where I thought to myself, maybe I'm not good at this next phase. We'd hit a plateau, and we'd hit plateaus before, and I'd figured out ways to get around them, but this plateau seemed more difficult to overcome. I had talked to people and was convinced by people in my company that the right thing to do would be to let other people take over. And I went through a big crisis of confidence, thinking, maybe I was the one who was holding the company back. Maybe this is something that is my fault, and I need to let it go, and I owe the people of the company that. So it was really hard to take these things apart, but that's what I ended up doing. I ended up stepping away from the CEO role and attempted to take a break. Didn't get very far into it when the company started performing worse and worse. I spent the next about year trying to work from the sidelines to help get things back on track, and it wasn't working. And I was kind of in denial of the fact that it wasn't working. Very difficult time in life for lots of different reasons, but it was hard to watch the thing that you'd built start crumbling, and people and team you cared so much about struggling so hard. Then the financial realities set in. It got to the point where we were in debt to the bank, and I couldn't deny the fact that things were not going well any longer, and I stepped back in. And then went through a very difficult process of trying to figure out how to pull us out of the nosedive that we were in. I'd managed to do it somehow, and then had a process of figuring out who to run it next, because I was still pretty convinced that this was the right thing to do, and found someone internally, promoted them. They were head of accounts, and she's now running the company. She's in the CEO position, and I'm back full-time in a sort of founder role, doing sales work and other things, trying to push the company in an interesting direction. But yeah, it took 2 tries, and the second try seems to be working really well. I mean, we've formed a great team, and she and I are, of course, don't always see eye to eye, but we're working really effectively together, and the company since we made those changes, has been profitable month over month, every month.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, were those changes ultimately, in retrospect, obvious?
I mean, it's obvious that we needed to change leadership. It was obvious that...
Or were they unanticipated? In other words, did the changes you need to make, were they surprising to you? Or were they like, no, they were pretty obvious. This is what needed to happen. It was just a matter of the specifics of how we do that.
A lot of the basics were pretty obvious. And the reason why that can be such a problem is that it's very easy to know what you have to do, and it can be very hard to do them if those things are difficult. People
because
find
you're a nice person.
Yeah, because you want to be liked,
Right.
Because you want to like yourself, you want people to like you.
So you must not have had any venture capital in this business.
No, I did not raise any money for this.
Yeah, that would be the equalizer.
Yes.
We don't
That
care
would have
about
changed
people.
things. That's right. That's totally right. And I'm a big believer in businesses that are, done outside that system.
Yeah,
I think they have a lot more character and can leave the world in a much better place. But yeah, they were mostly very obvious changes that I just dragged my feet on forever.
Because it's hard.
It's so hard. That has got to be one of the hardest things, is making the tough decisions and following through on them.
Well, but not even the tough decisions. So this is an interesting question. It's difficult dealing with people, because it's great when they do everything the way they should or the way you want them to, assuming that that's the right way. But there's a lot of inertia to overcome, a lot of energy to put into people to say, no, let's do it this way or let's do it this way. And that's hard work.
It's so hard. It's another one of those things that I think we will work out as a group of people on the planet, is figuring out how to get people aligned and moving in the same direction.
You're a very hopeful man.
Yeah.
Do you need a website that actually works and is easy to update? Savior Labs is a Boston web services firm that cares for your business and your team. We solve problems so you can focus on what you do best. Just follow the link in the show notes and enter code WEB1 for more information.
You said you were aficionado of sorts of science fiction. Which universe are you the most? Is it the Star Trek universe, the Star Wars universe? I mean, I'm here in the Star Trek universe because it's the utopian view of people finally working together and not needing money.
I was never a big fan of Star Trek growing up. I was much more of a Star Wars person, but
Okay.
the ideas that Roddenberry put into play, and the world, particularly of Next Generation. Next Generation is such a fantastic TV show. It's really, really worth checking out. It can seem a little cheesy at times, but it's like this fantastic Twilight Zone-like experimentation of the sort of limits of humanity and an understanding of a lot about how the future could work. It's a really beautiful show. Roddenberry paints a picture of a post-capitalist world, universe for humanity, and I think that it might be the next evolution of can we graduate to that level.
It's a lot of work to graduate to that level. We have a lot of things to do,
Yeah,
both scientifically and with energy is one of the biggest problems, is how do we provide energy.
Well, if you know the whole thing about type 1, 2, and 3 civilizations, that's how much energy you're extracting from your local star, and we're not type 1 even, which is harnessing all the energy that lands on our planet. When we can get to even that place, then energy becomes basically free.
Right.
It's as free as air is, which is not entirely free, but mostly free. Things change dramatically, and you're right, it is about energy. As soon as we have energy liberated, we're in a much, much better place.
But we have a huge debt to overcome of knowing how to react to circumstances that we're not used to. Because all of a sudden, how does the non-entrepreneurial, non-innovative person react in a world where they can do that? And that's a challenge, because there are a set of people that just tell me what to do. I'm not interested in that. And that's going to be a difficult paradigm shift for people to go through.
Of just having more time on their hands or more agency with their lives?
Yeah, more agency, I would say, in choosing what to do. We would like to think that everybody would be altruistic and take the better road, potentially the road less traveled, but we just have so much overcoming the inertia to do that.
I kind of believe that it will get easier over time. I know I sound incredibly optimistic in everything that I'm saying right now. There is a lot, but I think human beings, by and large, gravitate towards things that are better for them over time. I mean, that certainly feels like how history has gone. We're in the sort of quote-unquote best time to be alive of history, and most people are not talking about that. They're talking about all the problems that we see, but it's only because we're so globalized and we see all the problems now in focus. We used to only see community problems. You could argue that pre-agriculture was a great time to be a human too, but as we are, it seems like the trends are going in the right direction. We just have to get over a bunch of really gnarly problems around how to organize ourselves and then, solve some science hurdles out there. But I think it's possible.
You mentioned the word optimism. Do you think that predisposition towards optimism is a necessity for entrepreneurs? Or is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. I know people who are very cynical, and I actually think I am one, even though I haven't spoken that way in this conversation. But I think there's something about being able to see that it is possible to get something off the ground and to make change happen in a meaningful way is an absolute requirement of being an entrepreneur. Because typically the process of entrepreneurship is going from something that doesn't exist to something that does. And you have to have enough vision, imagination, hope, whatever you want to call it, to see that that is a possibility. And of course, the hope and positivity to take a risk. So you have to be optimistic when you're facing a big risk, saying, I think this is worth doing.
Well, I would challenge you on the word cynic. I don't think you're probably a cynic. You're probably a skeptic. And the difference between a skeptic and a cynic is a skeptic, when shown what is possible, will be your best advocate. In other words, you can flip a skeptic to a champion, but a cynic you cannot influence.
I like the term cynical optimist just because it's funny and self-contradicting.
Right.
But you're probably right. I am probably not deeply cynical.
Well, yeah, because I think that I agree. It is a sort of inflaming idea here to say, okay, what is that? It's a challenge, is it jarring? But I think that I'm a skeptic of most things, but once I learn about it and test it all, and I agree, you're not going to change my mind.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely like some stubbornness or something that's also part of the entrepreneurship personality type, where you have to be willing to stick with something long enough to get over the initial difficulties and hurdles, and saying, it's still going to happen. I'm definitely going to make this thing a reality. That perseverance, I guess people are calling it grit now or whatever. But
the word of the day, whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever the word is right now. That happens all the time. Just out of curiosity, do you think optimism is a requirement?
I do. I do. I don't think it would be very fun without optimism.
Yeah.
Or you've got to be greedy. Gordon Gekko, greed is good, that kind of thing. And greed has a bad connotation in society, but go back and watch that clip. It's a fascinating clip. I just used it in my class. But I think there is a dichotomy between the entrepreneur like you and like I have been, where we create our own worlds, and not grandiose terms, but we do. We've made the decisions, we've done the things. And then when you start to get into venture capital and, private equity and that whole world where they are concerned only with the money, it's a very different world. And I don't think that necessarily is a world of optimism. I think it's a world of exploitation.
Yeah.
The almighty dollar is the bottom line. And it's a very tantalizing equalizer of interpretation, is the dollar. I'm not a big fan of that, and I've been involved with venture capitalists, and I will never do it again. But
good for you.
That's how they're wired, and they should be, because they want to make the money for their stockholders. But I don't see us as a planet getting very far with that methodology. You look at the people like J. Paul Getty and things like that, and the whole world of the early 1900s, and where did it get people? I don't see a lot of value coming out of that, except wealth. So to make a very long comment, yes, I think optimism is a requirement, and mostly because I don't think it would be very fun without it.
Yeah. So it's so weird that there's such a tenuous but important relationship between investors and entrepreneurs, because they really, in some ways, couldn't be more different people. In some cases, you have to work with each other less than you might think, but in some cases, it's very important. For real growth, sometimes capital is super, super important to have access to and to deploy before, a competitor gets there, et cetera. But the motivations really are just so night and day different.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that with Apple, I think, now. I mean, I like to think that they can turn things around, but I think if you look what Tim Cook is doing to the company, it's really about optimizing for profit, and Jobs was still working hard to try to make something new in the world. He had the entrepreneur spirit, and Tim has the sort of the operations hat on, as the operations perspective. And it's the same thing with all the investors that I've met. They really are looking for a return, and it doesn't really matter how they get it. And if you just follow that logically, that can go to some places that are not very positive for the people that they're investing in.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem for Apple is that Steve Jobs was a once in a trillion people, once in a billion people. I mean, there's just not that kind of thought that mixes those things up. There was I'm going to get a link to it. There was a PBS special in the late 90s, which Steve Jobs was in, and this is after he'd been ousted from Apple, and it was one of the most insightful interviews, and I think I have it at home somewhere on a video cassette, and that's how old it is. But it was very insightful about, be careful who you give your company to and what you do this way. But you always got the sense that from what Steve Jobs was doing, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't, how can I make more money at this? It was like, this would be really cool to have. I want this. Now, he had good taste, so if he said, gee, I want triple stuff Oreos or quadruple stuff Oreos, okay, whatever. He happened to have a vision for the way technology synergized together to say, this is game-changing. And that doesn't exist in a lot of places.
Yeah. And I'm always so confused by people who lump him in with other more traditional money hoarders, other billionaires, because the difference to me is just night and day. And it's a subtle distinction that's super important, because the characteristics of a person like Jobs and like Musk are people who really want to see change in the world, and they're willing to work hard to lead towards it, as opposed to people who are just amassing money. And in my opinion, one of those things is not very useful for society, and the other one is incredibly useful. It's what I think has been at the heart of a lot of the positive change in the world. So I wish people could see the sort of difference for what you can learn from it, and the positive sides to emulate.
Okay,
absolutely.
So we've been talking with Paul Rush today of Substantial, and he's been joining us from Seattle, and we've had a great conversation about a little bit meandering, I think, but it's a fun conversation about both entrepreneurship and innovation and businesses he's been in. Be interested in feedback from our listeners, other areas you might like us to explore, whether it be science fiction or people problems or things like that. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions in closing, but what do you think when you get up every day? Is it, oh man, I got to get this work done with this client? Or is it, boy, I get to work with this great group of people? Or what's not heavy on your heart, but what fills your vision?
I think these days being back at the company and being a lot more focused on trying to make it sustainably successful. I've been working with some different coaches, which I highly recommend to people. Coaching, I think, is an amazing process to go through of self-improvement. I am very set on the goals that I'm working towards. And so I'm usually starting off the day being excited to make progress, small bits of incremental progress on those goals, and thinking about, what needs to be changed in sort of a course correction mode to get there. So that's what my mornings are usually all about. It's getting up and orienting the day towards taking a step forward.
Cool. All right. Recommend a book. What's your favorite book right now?
What kind of book do you want? Are you wanting something that's
something that you say, if you met somebody in the entrepreneurial world, not just, an acquaintance on the street, but say, you got to read this book.
Okay, I'm going to recommend two.
Okay.
We've hinted at it or talked about it at some point in our conversation. Sapiens. Everybody's been reading it. It's a fantastic book. It's really insightful as to how we got to where we are as a species on the planet, by Yuval Noah Harari, is fantastic. And then there's a science fiction book that I think could be the most prophetic book dealing with capitalism and artificial intelligence and a lot of other fun contemporary topics, called Pandora's Star by Peter Hamilton. And they both provide, I think, glimpses or ideas about where things could go. That's something that I'm super interested in.
Very cool. Well, okay. Any parting thoughts that you'd like to cover before we close out?
No, this has been just so much fun. There's so many more topics to cover on entrepreneurship. And, I'm just such a fan of getting out there and making your own path. I would encourage everybody to do it and to find help and inspiration, because it can be difficult to get over the initial hurdles, but if you can make it part of your life, I think it really opens up a ton of possibility and enjoyment, purpose, and engagement in life. So thank you so much for having me. Really
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Well, thank you for coming on, and I'm sure we're going to invite you back.
The Edge of Innovation is brought to you in partnership with Savior Labs. Savior Labs exists to help businesses mature and strategize for the future. Learn more about Savior Labs at saviorlabs.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Edge of Innovation, Hacking the Future of Business. For the show notes and more information about Paul, please visit paulparisi.com. The Edge of Innovation is produced by Jacob Young in conjunction with copious amounts of coffee. Music on today's episode was from bensound.com. Paul can be found on Twitter at pdparisi and on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/pdparisi. This episode, like all our episodes, is transcribed and available at paulparisi.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.